Hey YouTube, this is PokéCastXVll here, and today we're going to be looking at what I believe to be the top 10 decks for the Pokémon World Championships 2017. With Burning Shadows having just been released, this now shakes up the format going into Worlds, which means that we can expect a variety of decks to be played. The format this year will be Primal Clash, all the way up to the most recent set in Burning Shadows. Before we get started, there are a few things that I want to announce quickly. The first is this video is based off hypothetical information and is taken from previous tournament results, from regionals and recent international events, so if you are watching this post Worlds 2017, please do keep this in mind. The second is that this video will feature on the ProPokemon website, and if you'd like to check them out, all the links are within the description box below, where you can find a series of other articles to help you further your game. And finally, if Pokemon related content is your thing, and you do enjoy seeing videos about the Pokemon TCG, as well as about Pokemon in general, you can hit that subscribe button to keep posted for future uploads. And with all that said, let's begin.
Number 10.
Coming in at number 10, we have METACROSS-GX. With decks like Gardevoir and Ninetales in the format having a metal weakness, it only makes sense that a metal deck would feature in the top 10. METACROSS is a stage 2 GX Pokemon with an interesting ability, a decent attack and the option of a GX attack. Giga Hammer for 2 metal and a colorless deals 150 damage, however you then can't use Giga Hammer again the following turn. Stacked with Choice Band, you can then be hitting the magic 180, which KOs most EX and GX basic Pokemon. However, it's its ability in Geotech System that's the main focus of this deck. Geotech System, once per turn, allows you to attach a basic metal or psychic energy from your discard pile onto your active Pokemon. So what best pairs with METACROSS? METACROSS works extremely well with a new card released in Burning Shadows in Necrozma-GX. Necrozma-GX is a fantastic addition to the deck, as Light's End prevents all damage done to it by colorless Pokemon, immediately blocking out things like Mega Rayquaza EX and Drampa-GX. Following that, Prismatic Blast deals 10 damage plus 60 more for every psychic energy that you discard from Necrozma-GX. With that, you can probably see where the deck is going. Stack a load of energy with METACROSS' Geotech System, and then hit some pretty big numbers, giving you the option to one-shot anything in the current format. You also do have cards like Ultra Ball and Professor Sycamore, which enables you to get energy into the discard pile much quicker. Its GX attack in Black Ray GX deals 100 damage to all of your opponent's EX and GX Pokemon, which certainly does combo very nicely with Espeon EX's Miraculous Shine, de-evolving those big Stage 1 and Stage 2 GX Pokemon and knocking them out in the process. Since you do run Psychic Energy, Tapu Lele becomes another viable attacker in Energy Drive, and even offers another GX attack in Tapu Cure, but most importantly, fishes out necessary resources to help you set up more efficiently. And finally, you could also utilize cards like Max Potion, since you do discard the energy from Necrozma-GX anyway, and as a means of prolonging the life of your Metagrosses. Where this deck does struggle is against decks like VOLCANION-EX, not only hitting you for weakness but also being able to one-shot your Necrozmas. With that said, and EV still being a thing, it is very easy to tech a single Flareon from Ancient Origins to give Stage 1 Pokemon like ZOROARK as an example, the ability to hit weakness. Being a Stage 2 means that it can suffer from inconsistency of setting up, especially if you are under item lock from something like a Noivern GX or even a Vileplume, but otherwise it's certainly a deck that I think is worthy of a top 10 spot.
Number 9.
At number 9, we have Greninja Break. Greninja is a deck that always seems to do quite well, and once set up, can take down most things within the format. Greninja functions getting into play through your Frogadiers, which allows you to use water duplicates, and then you search out 3 more and put them onto your bench. Once you've got that going, you can then evolve your Frogadiers into Greninjas. That has a Shadow Stitching attack, which is great if you're trying to lock down your opponent out of abilities, dealing 40 damage. And of course you also have Moonlight Slash for 60 damage, plus the added 20 if you return a water energy back to your hand, comboing very nicely with Greninja Break. Once you have your Greninja Breaks out, you'll then have access to Giant Water Shuriken, which when in the active spot, deals 60 damage to any one of your opponent's Pokemon, when discarding a water energy. When you consider Greninja has free retreat, you can do this for at least twice a turn, or even more if you have access to switching cards. Against decks like Garbodor, you simply just Field Blow with the tool, and then Giant Water Shuriken twice to KO the Garbodor, and keeping your abilities in place. As for the lineup, you normally play just a 3 Froakie, not forgetting that it does have the bubble attack which can cause paralysis on a coin flip, only because once you have Frogadier out, you can then search for the rest through water duplicates. Having only 3 Froakie means that you can run 4 Talonflame, which increases your chances of starting with it. Talonflame not only acts as a wall, since it does have relatively high HP, but also does have a decent attack in Error Blitz for a single energy, which deals 40 damage and allows you to search for up to 2 cards in your deck, and put them into your hand, which is great for setting up in the early game. Later game you do also have Fisherman, which recovers your basic water energy and allows you to keep using Giant Water Shuriken and keep maintaining the pressure on your opponent. As great as Greninja is, with decks like Golisopod on the rise and item lock still being a factor, it can be quite difficult to set up at times. Even alone, sometimes Greninja can be its own worst enemy, as generally you don't run things like Shaymin-EX or Tapu Lele-GX, although some builds have been known to run Octillery for its ability Abyssal Hand, in which case you may want to think about your lineup of Froakies and Talonflame, but either way, it's a deck that I certainly think will make an appearance.
Number 8.
At number 8, we have an old concept in Mega Rayquaza EX. This deck got hit quite hard with the release of Sudowoodo and its roadblock ability, but since then, no one's really been playing Mega Rayquaza and the Sudowoodos have started to drop. With that, I certainly think that Mega Rayquaza could be in line for a comeback at this year's World Championships. Mega Rayquaza has the evolution trait, which means as long as there's a Spirit Link on your Rayquaza, you can evolve Rayquaza in the same turn you've played it, without ending your turn. Following that, you then have its Emerald Break attack, which deals 30 damage times the number of Pokemon you have on the bench. Paired that with Skyfield, you can deal a massive 240 damage, one-shotting more or less everything within the format. You could even throw in a Professor Kukui, if on the rare occasion you're forced to deal with something that does have 250 HP. Given that big beefy Stage 2 GXs seem to be quite common in the format, with massive amounts of HP, this could certainly be Rayquaza's time to shine. With Rayquaza you generally run a couple of Hoopa EXs to search out your multiple Shaymin EXs and allow you to feed through your deck much more efficiently and often hitting 240 damage in a single turn. On top of the double colourless energy, you do run basic, which you can get back through Mega Turbo, but the type of energy is open. Some builds play fire energy, just for the straight consistency, which opens up the possibility of using your opponent's Scorched Earths. Others play water and utilise Manaphy EX for the free retreat and perhaps even Glaceon EX, or even Lightning and Jolteon EX, and finally there's also the option of playing Metal for Magina's ability, Mystic Heart, preventing the effects of your opponent's attacks. When your opponent does eventually knock off your Skyfield, you can simply just dump your unwanted Shaymins and Hoopa EXs into the discard pile, and then recover them with something like Super Rod, Rescue Stretcher, or even Brock's Grit, and then repeat the cycle. Again, with big Stage 2 GXs in the format, Mega Rayquaza could certainly be in line for a comeback, however it does have its flaws. Firstly, if you do run into something like a Parallel City, or even if people are teching Sudowoodo, it can certainly hinder your bench space quite a lot, and as a result, limit your damage output. It does also struggle quite a bit if your opponent opens up with a Hex Maniac, which with Tapu Lele-GX in the format is very easy to do. This also applies to Silent Lab, although this is easier to get around. It can also struggle with late game ends, as you don't generally run any consistent form of drawing every turn, and can be quite difficult against ZOROARK decks with Mind Jack. With all that said, I certainly think that Mega Rayquaza has a place in this year's Worlds format, and is one that I would certainly be prepared for.
Number 7.
Coming in at number 7, we have a new deck in GOLISOPOD-GX. Golisopod is a Stage 1 grass type with 210 HP, and some very interesting attacks along with the GX attack also. First impression deals 30 damage, however, if it was on your bench and switched with your active, then it deals an additional 90 more. Paired that with Choice Band and you could be hitting 150 damage in a single turn with just one grass energy. It does have a decent second attack for a grass and 2 colourless, which deals 100 damage and gives you a buffer of -20 when your opponent attacks the following turn. Armor Press is great when you've run out of forms of switching, and it's pretty easy to power up since all you need is just a single grass and a double colourless energy. And once you have that, you also have the option of Golisopod-GX attack in Crossing Cut GX, which deals 150 damage and switches out Golisopod, hitting the magic 180 damage when you have a Choice Band attached. So with that, there are 2 ways in which you can play Golisopod. The first is more of a mono grass deck, with things like Forest of Giant Plants, and perhaps considering Vileplume and Lurantis to lock down your opponent and bumper up your damage outlet. If you do choose to go down that route, then you should be looking at playing a high count of things like Guzma and Acerola, as you want to ensure you're hitting those high amounts of damage on a consistent basis. Keep in mind that once you do scoop up Golisopod with cards like Acerola, you can then proceed to putting the whole thing back down as long as you have Forest of Giant Plants in play. The second option is perhaps making it more of a Stage 1 deck, and perhaps pairing it with things like Eevees. With that, you could choose whatever it is you want to counter. For example, if you're fearing a lot of Decidueye, then you could go with Flareon, or even Vaporeon if you are worried about things like Volcanion, and not to mention you do have Jolteon there as well. Another alternate attacker in the deck could be something like Zoroark, which is also a Stage 1, and with a Float Stone and its stand-in ability, gives you unlimited access to constantly switching out Golisopod. The main weakness of this deck of course stems from Volcanion-EX, and of course others playing Flareon themselves, even if you are running Vaporeon. I certainly do think the Stage 1 variant over the Vileplume one has a much better chance of beating Volcanion, that and the fact that it's a relatively new deck and we're not yet sure if it can compete at a tournament as prestigious as Worlds.
Number 6.
In at number 6 we have Zoroark Break. This deck started to feature quite a lot just because of how good its break form is. When evolved into Zoroark, you have two things going for you. Firstly, its stand-in ability, which certainly does give the deck a lot more flexibility, as you can switch Zoroarks into your active position whenever you please. You then have Mind Jack, which deals 10 damage plus 30 more for every Pokemon on your opponent's bench. This certainly does punish your opponents for playing down bench Pokemon, and when you have a Choice Band attached, you can be hitting some massive amounts of numbers for just 2 energy. Zoroark's Foul Play for a single Dark more or less copies one of the attacks of your opponent's active Pokemon, although you do have to fulfill the requirements to the best of your ability. So let's say for example your opponent has a Ninetales standing in your way, you can with the Choice Band play Professor Kukui, and then use Blizzard Edge against it, one-shotting it and taking 2 prizes. With that, you could also even copy your opponent's GX attacks, if they have anything that benefits you. Zoroark generally does need a little bit more support, so in the past, Rainbow Energy and Drampa-GX has been a solid play. This gives you something to fall back on if say your opponent doesn't have any good attacks to copy, or their bench space is quite minimal. With the increase of Zoroark and Drampa-GX, players have been teching things like Zygarde-EX, and with things like Marshadow-GX acting as a form of a toolbox, this certainly can be difficult to get around since your whole deck is fighting weak. Nonetheless, it's a deck that I do very much like a lot, and one that I think will definitely make an appearance.
Number 5.
In 5th spot, we have Alolan Ninetales. This is a deck that when featured, seems to always do quite well. Ninetales has a pretty solid 210 HP, is a stage 1 with 2 attacks and a very powerful GX attack. Ice Blade deals a solid 50 damage to one of your opponent's Pokemon, and Blizzard Edge for 2 water energy and a Colourless deals 160 damage, although you then have to discard 2 energy from Ninetales, not forgetting that double Colourless energy counts as 2 in this case. When you've racked up a bit of damage, you can then consider using Ice Path GX, which shifts all the damage onto your opponent's active Pokemon. This is great as say they have a Shaman EX or something on the bench that you can Lysander up. You can clean off all the damage from Ninetales and take 2 prizes in the process. This equally makes your opponents very fearful of attacking you since they don't want a massive retaliation in the process. A generic Ninetales list will usually run the promo Tapu Koko, as well as some Octillery for drawing support, and now you even have the new Safeguard Alolan Ninetales from Burning Shadows, which has the ability Luminous Barrier, preventing all damage done to it by your opponent's EX and GX Pokemon. Certainly another option worth having in the deck. Also not forgetting that Vulpix can search out any 2 cards from your deck with no energy, which certainly does help for your early game setup, especially if you are going second. In terms of energy acceleration, you have Aqua Patch, which allows you to take a basic water energy from your discard pile and attach it to one of your benched water Pokemon. This is where Tapu Koko proves to have quite a few uses within the deck, since you can promote it to the active spot, use Aqua Patch, and then retreat for free seeing as it does have free retreat for no energy cost. Ninetales though mainly struggles against decks that can one-shot you, such as Mega Rayquaza and Zoroark Break at times, normally since you want to be baiting them into attacking you and then using Ice Path. With that, spread damage decks like Necrozma-GX and Decidueye-GX that run Espeon-EX could also be a problem if they are KOing your small 60 HP Vulpix. For that reason, it may be a good idea to play a reasonable count of Rough Seas in the deck just to try and heal off that damage. With all that taken into consideration, I would fully expect to see Ninetales feature, as it's definitely worthy of a top 5 spot.
Number 4.
At number 4, we have Garbodor variants. This is a deck that's been piloted to a lot of success in the past couple of months, ever since the release of Guardians Rising. Garbodor's Trash Lance deals 20 damage times 20 more for every item card in your opponent's discard pile. This certainly does punish your opponents from using resources and in effect completely changes the way that your opponent approaches the game. On top of that, since you already run Trubbish, you can then run the Garbodor with Garbotoxin, which shuts down all abilities, an extremely powerful asset to have indeed in this current format. Paired with Garbodor, you have a few options. Drampa-GX has been its preferred option for the most part, however, Drampa is starting to see some decline in play. Another viable option is Espeon-GX, which functions off just a single psychic energy. Psybeam is a great attack which deals 30 damage and causes confusion and often makes your opponent second guess whether or not they want to attack. On top of that, you also have Psychic, which deals 60 damage plus 30 more for every energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. You also have Divide-GX, which for a Psychic and double Colourless, which is the same requirements as Psychic anyway, allows you to place 10 damage counters to your opponent's Pokemon in any way that you please. Drampa-GX on the other hand deals 20 damage with Righteous Edge, and discards a special energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. And for 3 colourless, deals 80 damage, plus 70 more if there's any damage counters on your bench. When you combine that with Choice Band hitting up to 180 damage, and cards like Team Magma's Secret Base and Rainbow Energy, you can certainly maximise the damage that you can deal with Drampa-GX. Its GX attack in Big Wheel GX shuffles your hand into your deck for a single energy, and allows you to draw up to 10 cards. This is great when you're in a tricky situation, and you are unable to feed out the cards you need. However, do keep in mind that your opponents can end you and put you back down to 6 cards at best, effectively using up your GX attack for that game. With Gardevoir being released, this deck is due for quite a setback, which questions whether it will feature as much as we'll touch on later. Even against a generic deck, people are starting to tech things like Team Flaregrant, or even Enhanced Hammer, since Drampa-GX does need at least 2 turns to power up, making it effectively dead weight if your opponents can prevent the energy attachment. With that and looking into the new format, I think right now I would definitely be leaning towards the Espeon variant at the moment. That doesn't mean that this deck is one that we should be disregarding.
Number 3.
At third place, we have Decidueye-GX. With the format involving a lot of Stage 1 and Stage 2 GXs, Decidueye makes a solid deck choice as you can exploit a lot of frailties. When set up through Forest of Giant Plants, you aim to keep spamming Feather Arrow, which places 2 damage counters on your opponent's Pokemon once per turn. And of course, the more Decidueyes you have out, the more you can use the ability. You also have Razor Leaf for a grass and 2 colourless, which deals a solid 90 damage, and its GX attack in Hello Hunt, which recovers any 3 cards from your discard pile and puts it into your hand. There are really 2 ways that you can play this deck, with or without Vileplume. Vileplume offers item lock, preventing you and your opponents from playing any item cards from your hand. However, more recently people have been opting not to play Vileplume, as you don't often tend to get it out on turn 1, and it can be quite clunky in the process. To help set up early game, you do run Alolan Vulpix. As for no energy, you can search out any 2 cards, helping you enhance your setup, and of course, there's also the option of NINETALES-GX, which you can use the Ice Blade attack, accumulating more damage, and of course you can make your opponent weary with attacking with Ice Path. Once you've got damage on the board, you can then turn to Espeon-EX, de-evolving and knocking out your opponent's big Stage 1 and Stage 2 GXs. Of course, being a grass deck, naturally fire decks like Volcanion are going to be quite tricky to play around, considering they're all basic Pokemon and you can't turn to Espeon-EX either. It can also suffer with big one-hitters like Mega Rayquaza and of course things like Hexmaniac, but otherwise once set up, I can certainly see Decidueye excelling at this year's event if it hits the right matchups.
Number 2.
In second place, we have Volcanion-EX. Volcanion has been around for a while and gets even stronger with the new expansion. Volcanion has the ability Steam Up, which when used allows you to discard a fire energy from your hand and deal an additional 30 damage this turn. This stacks so you can use it more than once if you have more Volcanion-EXs on the bench, and when used you can normally one-shot most things within the format with Volcanic Heat, which has a base damage of 130, or you could even go down the early game route of playing the non-EX Volcanion, which not only deals a little bit of damage, but acts as a great form of energy acceleration. This deck did start seeing some play with Turtonator-GX as an alternative attacker. However, what this deck gains from Burning Shadows is the release of Kiawe, a supporter card which allows you to search your deck for up to 4 basic fire energy and attach them to your Pokemon in any way that you please, and then your turn ends. When you consider going first that you can't attack anyway, getting this out has made it a lot easier with things like Tapu Lele GX in the format, to which you can then power up something like Ho-Oh GX, ready to hit 180 damage the following turn, 210 with a Choice Band, or even potentially more with Steam Up. With that said, this certainly lessens the threat of Garbodor, since you only need to play a single supporter card with very few item cards to get it going. A final consideration which I have seen played is Starmie from Evolutions for its ability Space Beacon, which allows you to discard a card from your hand and bring back 2 basic energy, comboing very nicely with Steam Up and hitting those big numbers. This deck is extremely powerful and very aggressive, and the combo with Kiawe is certainly one that I expect to see featured quite a lot at this year's World Championships. In terms of matchups though, Volcanion naturally excels against most grass decks, and all the cards within the deck are all high HP EXs and GXs, meaning that it doesn't get hit by de-evolving decks with Espeon-EX. You do generally run a lot of switching cards like Floatstone, and you may even want to consider more Guzma over Lysander, since things like Ho-Oh GX and Volcanion-EX don't allow you to attack the following turn when using Phoenix Burn and Volcanic Heat. Since Stage 1 decks are teching things like Vaporeon, which does make Ho-Oh GX a decent addition since it doesn't have a water weakness. It can also struggle with big one-shotters like Mega Rayquaza and NINETALES-GX, and is also worth keeping in mind that Hexmaniac can slow you down a little. Either way, I certainly think the Volcanion-EX is a very solid choice going into Worlds, and certainly a contender for the top spot.
Number 1.
And finally, the big number 1, and at first place we have GARDEVOIR-GX. Gardevoir is a new archetype, and one that's been hyped quite a lot going into Worlds. Gardevoir does have the ability Secret Spring, which once per turn allows you to attach a fairy energy from your hand to one of your Pokemon in play. When you do have more Gardevoirs out, this stacks, meaning that you can use it more than once. Gardevoir does only need the single energy to attack in Infinite Force, which deals 30 damage times 30 more for every energy attached to both active Pokemon, really punishing your opponents for playing down loads of energy. This can build up if you decide to stack more energy onto Gardevoir, but the fact that it only uses one energy means that you can utilize Max Potion, keeping your Gardevoirs alive longer and becoming just a straight up tank to try and take down. You also have its GX attack in Twilight GX, which shuffles 10 cards from your discard pile back into your deck. When you consider that Garbodor relies on having these item cards in the discard pile, this certainly does make for a very favourable matchup, since all they'll be left with is Drampa GX, which needs 3 energy anyway, and you could just nuke that with Infinite Force. On top of that, you do also run Octillery for Abyssal Hand, just to bail yourself out of late game ends and to keep the momentum going. And finally, another addition you could include in the deck is Gallade from Breakthrough, since you already have the stem of Gardevoir. Gallade is great for its Premonition ability, which allows you to look at the top 5 cards of your deck and put them back in any order, comboing very nicely with Octillery's Abyssal Hand. On top of that, it also has a Sensitive Blade attack, which deals 60 damage plus 70 more if you've played a supporter card this turn. Paired that with Choice Band and you can hit 180 damage with a non-EX and a non-GX Pokemon, which concedes only 1 prize when knocked out. And of course on top of that, Gallade is a fighting type, which does hit some weaknesses within the format, such as ZOROARK and Drampa GX to name a few. Gardevoir can struggle being a stage 2 deck with de-evolution decks, so it's important that you do keep on top of using things like Max Potion to eliminate their threat, and of course, things like Mega Rayquaza can be quite tricky, since they can one-shot you for 240 damage in a single turn. Either way, while not much is known about this deck, you only have to look at last year's World Championships, where a relatively unknown Mega Ordino won the whole event, which means that anything is possible. It's certainly a deck that I believe can go all the way, and one that I would give serious consideration to if you are going to this year's event. And with all that said, that is it, and that is my top 10 decks for this year's World Championships. In total, there were something like 20 to 25 decks to choose from, however this is just a compilation of my personal top 10. If you did like this video and you would like to see more Pokemon related content, you can do so by checking out the annotations at the end of this video. Alternatively, you can subscribe to the channel, while also not forgetting that I am on Facebook, and if you want to, you can also check out ProPokemon. All the links will be in the description box below. Otherwise, thank you very much for watching, and I will see you all next time.